The whole kingdom fell silent the moment the queen grabbed the maid's necklace. "You do not deserve to wear even this." Take Queen Spot and tore it from her throat. The old cord snapped, and something fell. It dropped from inside the largest carved bead, a small, flat thing of ancient gold, and struck the stone with a single, clear, ringing note that cut through the silence. It rolled, wobbled, and settled flat in the sunlight for the front rows to see. A medallion, old gold, worn smooth, and carved upon its face, an eagle with outspread wings, rising above a crescent moon and a single star. Picture it, a great open courtyard in the palace of Edu, packed wall to wall with the whole kingdom market women, farmers, titled chiefs, children lifted onto shoulders, every face turned toward the stone platform in the center. And on that platform, on her knees, her wrists bound before her, knelt a palace maid named Amara. Her head was bowed, her shoulders trembled. She had been accused of stealing the queen's royal bracelet, and the sentence had already been passed. She was to be punished in the open, before everyone she had ever served, so the whole kingdom would remember what became of a servant who stole from royalty. The drums had stopped, the crowd had gone silent, and the man chosen to carry out the punishment lifted the cane high into the morning air. But Queen Zuri was not satisfied. She climbed the platform herself, her gold-threaded wrapper sweeping the stone, and looked down at the kneeling, made with a hatred that surprised even the elders watching. "A thief," she said, loud enough for the back of the courtyard to hear. "And yet she kneels here wearing jewelry inside my husband's palace, as though she were someone." Her hand shot out and seized the worn string of beads Amara had worn since she was a small child. And across that crowded courtyard an old man, the king's most trusted adviser, who had served the throne for 40 years, made a sound that was almost a cry, and pressed his hand to his mouth. Because he had seen that mark before. He had held it himself, long ago, on the body of an infant. The king's first daughter, the little princess who had vanished one terrible night many years before, and been mourned by the whole kingdom as dead. The cane was still raised. The queen's hand still clutched the broken cord, and nobody moved. If you can already see where this is heading and your heart is with Amara, do me a small favor right now. Tap the like button, and in the comments, tell me the name of the town or country where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you have not yet joined our family, subscribe now, because the moment this story turns is coming, and you will not want to miss it. How does a palace maid beaten down, accused, dragged to her knees to be punished before the whole kingdom, come to be wearing the lost royal medallion of Idu against her heart? How does the daughter the king buried in his grief come to be kneeling for punishment in her own father's house, with no one, not even herself, knowing who she truly is? To understand that, we have to go back. Back before the bracelet, before the accusation, to a quiet girl who carried water before sunrise and never imagined that the necklace her dying mother begged her to keep was about to turn an entire kingdom upside down. This is the story of Amara, and I promise you, you will not forget how it ends. To everyone in the palace of Edu, Amara was simply the maid who had always been there. No one could remember a time before her. She had come as a small child, brought by a quiet woman named Mama Ngozi, who begged the head housekeeper for work, saying she was a widow, with a daughter, and nowhere else to go. The housekeeper had taken pity, and so the two of them were folded into the great machinery of the palace. Mama Ngozi in the kitchens, the little girl underfoot, fetching, carrying, learning. The years passed. Mama Ngozi grew old, and then, 3 rainy seasons ago, grew sick and died. And the little girl became a young woman with steady hands and a quiet voice and a way of moving through the palace that made people forget she was there at all. But the ones who did not forget her loved her. Amara was the first to rise in the whole palace. Before the cocks crowed, she was already at the well, her breath misting in the cool air. She swept the long verandas while the dew was still down, carried firewood for the cooks, scrubbed the great iron pots and the courtyards until the stones shone, and did all of it without complaint. With a quiet steadiness, the other servants leaned on without noticing they were doing it. It was the small things that made them love her. When the old gateman's knees gave out, and he could no longer climb to his sleeping mat, it was Amara who quietly moved his mat to the ground floor and told no one. When a kitchen girl burned her hand and wept, certain she would be beaten, it was Amara who bound it and took the blame herself. When a serving boy's mother fell ill in a far village, it was Amara who pressed half her own ration of yam into his hands and told him to send it home. She had nothing, and still she gave. That was the thing about her no one could explain. In the evenings, when the work was done, she would sometimes sing a voice like clear water. Old songs nobody had taught her, that seemed to rise from some deep and private place. The children crept close to listen, the tired women closed their eyes, and for a little while the hardness of their lives would soften. Her closest friend was a kitchen girl named Ndidi Sharp-Tongue, fiercely loyal, self-appointed protector of a woman she thought far too gentle for the world. One day someone is going to take advantage of all that kindness, Ndidi was always warning her, and I am very small. Amara, so please, be careful. And Amara would only laugh and say that kindness costs nothing, and that the world had enough hardness without her adding to it. There was one person, though, who watched Amara more closely than any servant, and it was the last person anyone would have expected. It was the king himself. King Emeka was a great and aging man, stooped now with long years and old sorrows. He had ruled more than 30 years, respected and even feared. Yet those who knew him best knew that somewhere inside him was a wound that had never healed. And in recent months, they had noticed something strange. The king had taken to watching the quiet maid who swept his courtyards. He would pause to listen to her sing, a faraway look in his eyes. He asked after her by name. Once, when she served him kola, he held her gaze a moment too long, and his hand trembled. "There is something in that girl," he said one evening to his old adviser, Iche Nwabwe. Her face, her voice. When I look at her, an old grief turns over in my chest, and I do not know why. The old adviser said nothing, but he too had begun to watch and to wonder. The king praised Amara openly, and often he praised her loyalty before the whole court, and said more than once that she had more honor in her than half the titled men in his hall. The servants glowed to hear it, proud of their quiet sister. But not everyone was glad, because every word of praise the king spoke about the maid fell, like a small cold stone, into the heart of the queen. Queen Zuri had not been born to the palace. She had fought her way into it, a powerful family in the eastern provinces, beautiful and clever and ambitious, married to the king years after the death of his first beloved queen. She had given him 2 strong sons, and by every measure the world could see, she had everything. The finest cloth in the kingdom, a treasure box of gold and coral, a seat at the king's right hand. And yet she was not at peace, for there was an old story everyone knew and no one spoke aloud in the king's hearing. Long ago, before Zuri, the king had loved his first wife, Queen Ifeoma. Gentle, good, adored by the people. Ifeoma had given him a first child, a tiny princess, but there had been a terrible night of fire and raiders, when an envious faction within the kingdom, men who wanted the throne, attacked the royal household in the dark. When the smoke cleared, Queen Ifeoma was dead, and the infant princess was gone, vanished, never found. The king searched for years. He never recovered. And though he took Zuri as his wife and built a new life, the people still whispered that his truest heart lay buried with his first wife and the daughter he had lost. Zuri had spent years living in the shadow of a dead woman and a lost child, and she had hated it. So when she saw her king begin to gaze with soft, grieving eyes at a common palace maid, something cold and old turned over inside her. The girl was nothing, a servant, an orphan. And yet every time the king praised the maid's loyalty, every time his eyes followed her across the courtyard, Zuri felt the ground shift beneath her, felt the old fear rise. The fear of being the wife who was chosen but never truly loved. Who is she? Zuri asked her housekeeper one afternoon, watching from a high window, as Amara crossed the courtyard with a jar of water on her head. That maid my husband cannot stop speaking of. That is only Amara, my queen. An orphan, the daughter of a widow who served in the kitchens and died some years ago. a hard worker. Well liked, but she is nobody. There is nothing to her. Nothing, Zuri repeated softly, watching the girl move. And yet, she could not look away. There was something about the maid's face that troubled her, a familiarity she could not place, like a dream half remembered. The more she stared, the more it slipped away, and the more it slipped away, the more it frightened her. That night, the queen could not sleep. She lay in the dark beside her husband, and felt, for the first time in years, that her place in the world was not as solid as she had believed. She told herself she was being foolish, that the girl was a servant and nothing more. But fear does not listen to reason, and by the time the first light came, she had begun, quietly, secretly, in the cold private chambers of her own heart, to hate the gentle maid who had never done her any wrong at all. At first the hatred showed only in small ways, a sharp word, a task made harder, a privilege quietly taken. The queen instructed the housekeeper that Amara was to be given the heaviest work, never praised, and never again brought before the king. The housekeeper, who feared her, obeyed. But it was not enough. The king's affection did not cool. Kept from his sight, Amara only became more of a mystery to him, and more of an ache. And the queen, watching her husband's distracted, grieving face, understood with a sinking heart that small cruelties would never be enough. If she wanted the maid truly gone, cast out, erased, she would need the whole kingdom to turn against her. She would need a crime, and a queen who owns a treasure box of gold does not have to wait long to invent one. Among all the treasures the queen owned, there was one she prized above the rest. A royal bracelet of pure gold set with deep red coral, an heirloom of her own family, worn only on the greatest occasions. Everyone in the palace knew it, and she guarded it jealously. So when one bright morning the palace woke to the queen's furious wailing, and word spread that the bracelet had vanished in the night, the whole household was thrown into chaos. "It is gone," she cried, standing in the center of her chamber, her voice carrying down the corridors. "My mother's bracelet, stolen from my own room while I slept. There is a thief in this palace, a thief who crept into the private chambers of the queen." Guards were summoned. The gates were sealed. No one was to leave. And the queen, her eyes red, her voice trembling with what looked to all the world like real grief, demanded that every chamber and sleeping quarter be searched until the treasure was found. The search began. The servants stood in frightened clusters in the courtyard, each praying that terrible thing would not be found among their own poor belongings. And it was the queen herself who directed the guards. It was the queen herself who said, in a voice pitched to carry, "Search the maid Amara's quarters. They say that one is not what she seems. They say a servant too kind on the surface often has something to hide beneath." "That is a lie," Ndidi hissed, before she could stop herself. "Amara has never taken so much as a grain of rice that was not given to her." "Silence that girl," the queen said coldly, and a guard's heavy hand fell on Ndidi's shoulder. The guards went to the bare corner where Amara slept. They lifted her thin mat, and there, beneath it, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, pushed against the wall as if hidden by a guilty hand, lay the queen's royal bracelet, gold and coral gleaming in the dim light. A gasp went through the crowd. Amara stared at it as though it were a snake. "That is not mine," she finally managed, barely a whisper. "I have never seen it before. I did not put it there. Someone must have." "There it is!" the queen cried, sweeping forward, her finger leveled at the maid, beneath her own mat, hidden by her own hand. "This is the kindness you all praise so highly. A snake, a thief, who repays the palace that fed her by stealing from the queen herself. My queen, I swear." Amara sank to her knees, hands open, face white. "I swear before the gods and the spirit of my mother, I did not take it. I have served this palace my whole life. Someone has placed this here to ruin me. I do not even know why anyone would." "Lies," the queen said, "like iron. The thing was found beneath your mat. What more proof does anyone need? Bind her." And the guards took hold of Amara's arms. The servants watched in horror, but not one dared speak. They had seen the bracelet pulled from beneath her mat with their own eyes. Only Ndidi struggled and shouted until a guard clamped a hand over her mouth and dragged her back. The matter went before the council of elders that very afternoon, And here the queen played her part with a skill that frightened those who watched closely. She did not rage. She wept of her mother's bracelet, of the violation of her chambers, of her grief that a servant she had sheltered could betray the royal house. And grief, in a queen, is far more convincing than rage. The elders conferred. The evidence was plain. The stolen treasure, found hidden in the accused's own quarters. She had no proof of innocence, no witness, nothing but her word. And the word of a servant weighed as nothing against the grief of a queen. By the laws, theft from the royal house was among the gravest of crimes. And so the sentence was passed. Amara was to be punished publicly in the great forecourt of the palace, before the assembled kingdom, so all of Idu would witness the price of betraying the throne. The king was away. He had ridden out 3 days before to settle a dispute in the far provinces, and was not expected back for a week. The queen had counted on this. By the time her husband returned, she meant for the troublesome maid to be long gone, disgraced, broken, cast out forever, a closed matter even a king could not undo. She had thought of everything. Everything except the necklace. They locked Amara in a small storeroom at the edge of the palace grounds to wait for morning. It was dark there, cold, and smelled of old grain and dust. For a long time she did not weep. She was too stunned. She kept turning the day over, trying to understand how a morning like any other had ended with her here, condemned. The bracelet beneath her met like something out of a nightmare. The queen's pointing finger and her terrible, weeping, lying face. And slowly the truth settled over her like a cold blanket. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone had wanted her destroyed, and she did not even know why. Only then, alone in the dark, with no one to see, did the tears finally come. She wept for the unfairness of it, that she had spent her whole life trying to give more than she took. And this was where it had brought her, bound, accused, hated by people she had never wronged. She wept until she had no tears left, and then she reached up with her bound hands, found the worn string of beads at her neck, and pressed it to her lips. The necklace was the only thing in the world that was truly hers. Mama Ngozi had given it to her. The quiet woman who had raised her, the only mother she had ever known. She could still remember the night the old woman died, the fever burning through her, her thin hand gripping Amara's with surprising strength. "Promise me you will never take it off," Mama Ngozi had whispered, her eyes wild and urgent in the lamplight. "Never sell it, never lose it, no matter how hungry you are. This necklace is not what it seems. My daughter, one day it will speak. One day it will tell the world who you truly are." Amara had not understood who I truly am. "Mama, I am Amara. I am your daughter. What else is there to know?" But the old woman had only gripped tighter, her eyes filling with tears. "There is so much I should have told you, so much I was afraid to say. Forgive me for keeping you in the dark. I only ever wanted to keep you safe." Those had been nearly her last words. She had died before dawn, taking whatever secret she carried into the silence. For 3 years Amara had worn the necklace and wondered, and now, in the cold dark of the storeroom on the last night before her disgrace, she pressed it to her lips and whispered into it as though her mother could hear. "What did you mean, Mama? Who am I?" "Because I am about to lose everything, and I still do not know. If this necklace is ever going to speak, let it be now." The necklace only lay cool against her lips in the dark, but she was not as alone as she believed. Far across the palace, the king's oldest adviser, Ichi-Enubes, sat awake by a single lamp, deeply troubled. He had not attended the hearing. Age had confined him to his bed, but he had heard every detail, and something about it sat wrong in his old bones. He knew the Maid Amara. In 40 years of serving the throne he had learned to read hearts the way other men read the weather, and he had never read anything in that girl but goodness. A woman who gave away her own food and sang 2 lonely children did not creep into the queen's chambers to steal a bracelet and then hide it, foolishly beneath her own mat, where the first search would find it. A real thief hides a crime where it cannot be traced. This crime had been hidden where it was certain to be found, and there was something else he could not stop thinking about. He had heard the king say, "When I look at her, an old grief turns over in my chest." And Ichi Nuabues, perhaps the only living man who remembered the lost princess clearly, who had searched the forests himself the night she vanished, felt that same grief turn over whenever he looked at Amara's face. It was the eyes, the shape of the brow, the way she tilted her head when she sang. He told himself he was a foolish old man seeing ghosts in a servant's face. The princess was gone, surely dead these many years, and yet he could not sleep. As the long night wore on, he made a quiet decision. In the morning, before the punishment, he would go to the forecourt and look at the maid one more time in the clear light of day. He did not know what he was looking for, but something in his heart told him he had to be there. He did not know that he was about to witness the moment the truth had waited 26 years to tell. The morning came gray and then gold, and the whole kingdom came with it. Word had spread through every quarter and village within a day's walk. Ansothe Kamim market women, farmers with the red dust of the roads still on their feet, traders, children, old men leaning on staffs. They filled the forecourt wall to wall and climbed onto ledges to see, and the air buzzed with the low, restless hum of a great crowd waiting for something terrible and certain. In the center stood the platform of judgment, a broad slab of gray stone. To one side, beneath a canopy of royal cloth, sat Queen Zuri, regal and composed, her 2 sons beside her, the gold of her station shining. She had dressed for the occasion. She wanted the kingdom to see its queen, wronged, dignified, just, presiding over the punishment of the servant who had betrayed her. The drums sounded. The crowd went still, and Amara was led out, between 2 guards, her wrists bound, her plain wrapper stained from the storeroom floor. She had not slept. Her face was drawn and pale. But as she walked into the light and saw the vast sea of faces, many of them faces she had served, faces she had sung to in the evenings, she did not crumble. She lifted her head. She had decided in the long dark that whatever they did to her, she would not let them see her broken. She had her innocence, even if no one else would believe it, and she would keep it. They brought her to the platform and made her kneel on the cold stone. The town crier read out the charge for all the kingdom to hear, that the maid Amara had stolen the royal bracelet of the queen, that it had been found in her own quarters, that she had been judged guilty by the council of elders, and that she was sentenced to be punished publicly and then cast out. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some jeered, but many who knew her fell silent and troubled, for it was hard to look at that gentle, kneeling face and see a thief. "Does the accused have anything to say?" the crier asked. Amara lifted her head, and though her voice shook, it carried to the very back of the forecourt. "I am innocent. I know none of you will believe me. The thing was found in my room, and so my word means nothing. But I will say it anyway, because it is the truth, and the truth is all I have left. I did not steal the queen's bracelet. I have never stolen anything in my life. Many of you know me. Many of you have eaten beside me. I ask only that, whatever happens today, you remember the Amara you knew, and ask yourselves, in your own hearts, whether she was ever a thief." A heavy silence followed, and in it, more than a few people lowered their eyes, ashamed. But the queen rose. "Sweet words," she said, cutting through the silence like a blade. "How gentle she sounds. This is how she fooled you, all fooled even the king with her false humility. But sweet words do not undo a crime. My bracelet was found beneath her mat. There is nothing more to say." She turned to the guards, her voice rising. "Carry out the sentence. Let the kingdom see what becomes of those who steal from the throne." The man chosen to carry out the punishment stepped onto the platform and took up the cane. The crowd drew a single breath and held it. Somewhere, a child began to cry and was hushed. Amara closed her eyes, and her lips moved, not in a plea, but in the wordless song her mother used to sing, rising softly from somewhere deep inside her, and the cane went up high into the morning air. But the queen, watching the maid pray with that serene, unbroken face, felt her old fear and hatred boil over. It was not enough. The girl was still too dignified, still wearing that calm the king so loved. And there, around her neck, catching the light, was that worn string of beads, a servant's trinket, as though even now she imagined herself someone. The queen could not bear it. She rose and climbed the platform herself, and the crowd watched in surprise as their queen crossed the stone to stand over the kneeling maid. "Wait," she said to the man with the cane. Then, to Amara, with a contempt that made the front rows flinch, "A thief. And yet she kneels here wearing jewelry inside my husband's palace, as though she were something." Her hand shot out and seized the beads. "You do not deserve to wear even this. Please." Amara's eyes flew open. "Please. Not that anything but that. My mother gave me that. It is all I have of her." "Then you should not have become a thief," the queen hissed. And from the edge of the platform an old voice cried out, "Ichi, nuavese," who had been watching the maid's face, with his heart in his throat, who saw the queen's hand close around the necklace and felt a sudden nameless terror. "My queen, wait. Do not." But it was too late. With a violent jerk of her arm, Queen Zuri tore the necklace from Amara's throat. The old cord snapped. The carved beads scattered across the grey stone, bouncing and rolling, some tumbling off the edge into the dust below. And from inside the largest bead, the great carved pendant that had hung against Amara's heart since she was a small child, the one her dying mother had begged her never to lose, something small and hard came loose, fell, and struck the stone with a single clear, ringing note. It was gold. Old gold, worn smooth with age. It spun on the stone, around and around, while every eye in the front of the crowd followed it. And then it slowed, wobbled, and settled flat in the morning sun. And upon its face, carved deep and unmistakable, was an eagle with outspread wings, rising above a crescent moon and a single star. For a moment, no one understood. The crowd stared. The queen stared, the broken cord still in her fist. Amara stared at the small golden thing before her. This secret hidden in her necklace her whole life, without her ever knowing. And then the old adviser made a sound that silenced the entire forecourt. It was a cry, half disbelief, half a grief so old it had become a kind of joy. He had pressed both hands to his mouth, his eyes streaming, his whole body shaking. He stumbled up onto the platform, moving faster than anyone had seen him move in years, and fell to his knees beside the medallion. With trembling hands, he lifted it into the light. "This mark," he whispered. Then, louder, his voice cracking and rising until it reached every corner of the forecourt. "This mark. I know this mark. I have held this very medallion in my own 2 hands." He turned, the gold held high, tears running down his weathered face. "This is the royal medallion of the bloodline of Edu, the eagle, the moon, and the star. It is placed upon one child, and one child only, in each generation, the firstborn of the royal house, on the day of their naming." His voice broke. "I placed this medallion myself, 26 years ago, around the neck of an infant, the first daughter of King Emeka and his beloved queen Ifeoma, the little princess, the one who was lost. Let us stop here, just for one breath. Look at her, kneeling on that cold stone, bound, accused, a single moment from punishment, while the whole kingdom that came to watch her disgrace now stares in dawning horror at the gold in the old man's hands. The maid they were about to break, the princess they had mourned as dead, the same person, kneeling there, about to be punished in her own father's house." A sound went through the crowd like wind through dry grass, gasps, cries, the rising murmur of 1,000 people realizing the same impossible thing at once. "It was lost," the old man went on, weeping, "the night of the great attack, the night the raiders came, the night Queen Ifeoma was killed, and the infant princess vanished and was never found. We searched for years. We believed her dead. The whole kingdom mourned." He turned slowly, and his streaming eyes fell on Amara's face, and he looked at her now the way a man looks at a miracle. But she was not dead. She was here. She was here all along. He reached out a shaking hand toward the kneeling maid. "Child, the woman who raised you, who gave you this necklace and begged you never to lose it. Tell me, was she once a servant of this palace? Did she come here long ago? A frightened woman, with a baby the whole world believed was her own." Amara's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, but in that terrible silence everyone heard it. "She was a servant here once. Long ago, before I can remember, Mama Ngozi. She told me she came from somewhere far away. She raised me alone, and when she was dying, she made me promise never to take off the necklace. She said one day it would tell the world who I truly am. And then, from the edge of the crowd, an old woman's voice rose, shaking. It is true. The people turned. An ancient woman was pushing forward on a stick, her face wet with tears. It is true, all of it. I knew Ngozi. We served in the kitchens together, long ago. On the night of the attack, the night of the fire, I saw her run from the burning royal house with a bundle in her arms. I thought she was fleeing for her own life, but it was not her life she was saving. It was the princess. She took the child and ran, and hid, and never told a living soul. Because she knew the men who had attacked the palace, the men who wanted the throne, would never stop hunting the true heir while the child lived. So she raised her as her own, a servant's daughter, hidden in plain sight, in the very palace she was born to rule. She gave up everything. She lived in fear every day, and she carried the secret to her grave to keep that girl alive. Another old voice rose, and then another. One by one, the eldest among the crowd came forward, and the pieces fell into place before the whole kingdom. The loyal servant who could not abandon an innocent child. The secret kept for a quarter of a century. The necklace built around the one piece of proof that could one day set everything right. The lost princess of Aidu had not died that long ago night. She had been kneeling all these years, sweeping the floors of her own father's palace, guarded, without knowing it, by the fierce and silent love of a poor woman who had risked everything and asked for nothing. And Amara understood it all at once, why Mama Ngozi had always held her a little too tightly, the fear that had lived in her eyes, the way she had guarded that necklace as though it were made of something more precious than gold. It had been made of the truth. She began to tremble from head to foot. It was at that very moment, as if the gods themselves had arranged it, that the great gates were flung open and a rider came galloping through, and a cry went up, The king has returned." King Emeka had ridden through the night. He had heard, only the evening before in the far provinces, that his queen had condemned a palace maid to public punishment, and something in the report had troubled him beyond all reason, troubled him so deeply he could not wait. He had ridden home at a punishing pace, not knowing why his heart pounded so, knowing only that he had to reach the palace before the morning was out. He swept into the forecourt on his lathered horse and took in the scene, the platform, the kneeling maid, the weeping adviser, the gold medallion shining in the old man's raised hand, and he went very still. "Noabwes," he said, dismounting slowly, his voice strange. "What is this? What is happening here?" The old adviser turned to his king and could not speak. He simply held out the medallion in both trembling hands. The king came forward and looked down at it, and the whole kingdom watched the great aging man's face change, watched recognition break across it like dawn over the hills, watched the color drain and rush back, watched his hands begin to shake. He knew that medallion, he had held it himself 26 years ago, on the day of his daughter's naming. He had wept over its loss for half his life. Slowly he raised his eyes from the gold to the face of the maid kneeling bound upon the stone. And now he saw it. Now he understood the grief that had turned in his chest every time he looked at her. The song that had haunted him, the face that had reached into his oldest wound. He saw his lost Ifeoma in every line of that face. He saw his daughter. "My child!" he breathed, and his voice shattered. He crossed the platform in 3 great strides and fell to his knees before her, the king on his knees before a bound servant, before his entire kingdom. With shaking hands, he loosed the bonds from her wrists. "My daughter, you are alive. You were here all this time, and I did not know you. I walked past you. I let them. Oh, forgive me. Forgive an old fool who buried his own child in his grief and could not see her kneeling before his own eyes." And the king took his long-lost daughter into his arms, there on the platform where she had been brought to be punished. And the whole kingdom wept with them, for there was not a heart in that vast forecourt that was not broken open by the sight of a father holding the daughter he had mourned as dead for 26 years. As for Queen Zuri, she stood frozen at the edge of the platform, the broken cord still hanging from her fingers, her face the color of ash. Every eye in the kingdom began, slowly, to turn toward her, and understanding crept through the crowd like a cold wind. For if this maid was the lost princess, then the woman who had tried to have her beaten and cast out, who had hidden a bracelet beneath an innocent girl's mat to destroy her, was standing right there, holding the very necklace she had torn from a princess's throat. The truth Zuri had never even known she was fighting, had clawed its way out of a servant's necklace, because she could not stop herself from tearing it apart. The investigation that followed laid everything bare. Confronted before the Council of Elders, the threads of the Queen's scheme unraveled one by one. The housekeeper, weeping, confessed that the Queen had ordered her to torment the maid and keep her from the king's sight, and a frightened young guard, his conscience too heavy to carry, came forward and admitted the thing that broke the case open. On the night the bracelet vanished, it was Queen Zuri herself who had given it to him and ordered him to hide it beneath the maid's mat where the cert would be sure to find it. There had never been a theft at all. The Queen had staged the whole thing. The wailing, the search, the grief to destroy a girl whose only crime was that the king had looked at her with love. The kingdom waited to see what the king would do. To conspire against the rightful heir was among the gravest crimes imaginable, and there were those in the court who called for the harshest of punishments, who said the Queen should kneel on that same platform and suffer the very disgrace she had planned for another. But it was Amara herself, Princess Amara now, though her heart was still the heart of the gentle maid, who asked to speak. She stood before the court, not yet comfortable in the royal cloth they had draped upon her, and looked at Queen Zuri, who knelt now where Amara had so recently knelt, stripped of her gold, her head bowed, waiting for judgment. "I have spent my whole life as the lowest person in this palace," Amara said quietly. "I have been hungry, I have been overlooked, and these past days I have been accused, and bound, and brought within a single breath of a punishment I did not deserve. So I know better than anyone in this hall exactly what it feels like to kneel where she kneels now, to be at the mercy of someone with the power to destroy you." She turned to her father, "And that is why I cannot ask you to do to her what she tried to do to me. If my first act as your daughter is to repay cruelty with cruelty, then I am no better than the thing she tried to make me out to be. Let her be judged, let her be stripped of her title, and sent away from the palace of Edu to live out her years far from the throne she schemed to protect. But let it end there. Let the cruelty end with me." The hall was silent, and the old king looked at his daughter with such pride and wonder that he could not speak for a long moment. And so it was done. Queen Zuri was stripped of her crown and title, and sent away from the palace of Edu forever to live out her remaining years in a distant province. It is said that in her exile, alone at last, with nothing but her own conscience, she came to understand the true weight of what she had done, and that more than once in the years that followed she wept, not only for the throne she had lost, but for the gentle girl she had tried to break, and for the mercy that girl had shown her in the end, which she knew in her heart she had not deserved. If Amara's mercy moved you, if you believe the way she chose to answer, cruelty says something about the kind of person she truly was, then do something for me. Type the word mercy in the comments, so I know you are still with us, and share this story with someone who needs reminding that you can be wronged by the whole world and still choose not to become hard. That, more than any crown, is what made her a queen. The transformation of the kingdom in the year that followed was a wonder to behold. The people who had filled the forecourt to watch a maid be punished now lined the roads to bow as their princes passed. The girl who had drawn water before dawn now sat at her father's right hand. But the strangest and most beautiful thing of all was that the crown did not change her. Princess Amara still rose early. She still knew the name of every servant in the palace, because they had been her family long before they were her subjects. She raised her friend Ndidi to be the chief lady of her household, and the sharp-tongued kitchen girl wept and scolded her for crying and wept again. She made certain no servant in the palace was ever again made to work from darkness to darkness as she once had. And in the evenings she sat with the lonely children and sang the same wordless song her mother used to sing, the song that had been all along, the lullaby of her own royal house, carried in her blood through the years of hiding without her ever knowing it. And she honored Mama Ngozi above all. She had the old servant's grave marked at last with honor, and let the whole kingdom know what that poor, brave woman had done, how she had run into the fire to save a child who was not her own. given up her name and her peace to raise the princess in secret, lived every day in fear, and carried the secret to her grave to keep her daughter alive. The kingdom that had known her only as a kitchen servant came to speak her name with reverence, and mothers told their daughters the story of Mama Ngozi, who loved a princess enough to give up everything so the world would remember that the greatest nobility is not always found beneath a crown. As for the king, the grief that had bent his shoulders for 26 years lifted at last. The people said he had aged backward, that the daughter he had buried in his heart had brought him back to life. In the evenings he would listen to her sing in the courtyard below, as he had when he did not know who she was, only now he knew. And the knowing filled the old wound with something warmer than he had felt in half a lifetime. And the necklace, the worn string of beads that had hidden a princess's birthright for 26 years, Amara had it restored with care, and wore it still, every single day. Against her heart, the gold and coral of her royal station meant little to her. But the simple beads, given to her by a poor, brave woman who had risked everything to keep her safe, those she would treasure until the end of her days. For they had not been worthless after all. They had been the most precious thing in the entire kingdom. They had been the truth. On the first anniversary of her crowning, Princess Amara stood in the great forecourt, on the very stone where she had once knelt to be punished, and looked out over the kingdom that had come to celebrate her. She pressed the necklace to her lips, as she had on so many lonely nights, and whispered to the woman who had raised her, "You kept your promise, Mama. It told the world who I am, just as you said it would. And I will keep mine. I will never take it off." The wind moved gently through the great Iroko tree at the edge of the forecourt, and somewhere, se felt sur too. Mothers were smiling down upon her, the one who had given her life, and the one who had given her everything else. For the elders of ID have a saying, and they tell it to their children to this day, that the truth is like the great river that runs beneath the earth. You may build a city on top of it. You may forget that it is there. You may live your whole life and never hear it move. But the river does not stop flowing in the dark, and one day, in its own time, it will find a crack in the stone, and it will rise. The maid they tried to punish became the princess they had lost. The necklace they thought was worthless held the truth that saved a kingdom, and the cruelty meant to destroy an innocent girl became, in the end, the very thing that revealed her to the world. Truth may stay hidden for years, but it cannot stay hidden forever. If this story touched your heart, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs reminding that no kindness is ever truly wasted, and that the truth always finds its way home in the end. Subscribe to our family if you have not yet, so you never miss a story, and I will see you in the next one.